And that's what's lacking, I think, with a lot of people's electronic music compositions is it sounds very two-dimensional, and they don't get that full aspect of depth because they're not thinking about what environment is my song taking place in. This is such a small, nerdy point, but it makes a huge difference, and people are usually like, are you really fixating on that? And I'm like, yes, I'm fixating on that because it's important. And what I'm talking about is if you unintentionally don't dissipate energy from one of these elements, let's say you have a downlifter, and that downlifter trails off into absolute silence, or your reverb decay tail isn't long enough and you get a few milliseconds of silence here or there, that shit sounds really whack and really amateur. And so I found setting up some sort of baseline level of floor noise at say minus 55, minus 50 dB. And then point two is like really utilizing that minus 60 to like minus 35, 40 dB range, as well as everything above, is just that area. I mean, I've even done collabs with people where they scoff and they're like, why would you do that? You can't even hear elements that low. And it's like, yeah, maybe, but you can feel it as soon as I take this group off. And when that riser dies out, I sort of think of my effects sections as this like amorphous blob. And maybe like a little part will like stick out like an amoeba or something. Maybe like whatever, you get the riser, but it always dissipates back into this baseline level. And it's like the AC unit running in the background. It's so quiet and so consistent, you tune it out. But then say you have a section where you want a checkerboard and you want the reverb of your drop bass to really fill out the stereo width. Well, now suddenly you can checkerboard silence from almost silence to silence, and that opens up actually a great deal of room for that reverb to feel even bigger. And now you have all sorts of checkerboarding opportunities with the extreme end of your mix in the low decibel range.
Yeah,
man.
You bring up a good point about something I also don't think people even think about or consider much, is that like one thing that I'll do on almost every track is have some sort of like ambience or vinyl crackle, and I will have that at like minus 40 dB if I'm thinking about what the actual final dB level of that track is probably like minus 40. And you probably aren't ever going to pick it out, but if you took it off, you definitely say this record feels more sterile.
Mm-hmm.
And it's those little tiny things that bring up that little noise floor, so that like silence is awkward unless it's very intentional.
Mm-hmm.
And those little details that just remove your conscious thought of like, why does this feel like so sterile? Like if you could just do those little details, like all you're thinking about is how good the song is, rather than like, what is missing? Like, why am I not hearing this thing right? Yeah.
100%.
Man, that's why people love old recordings so much, is because it went through tape and then it got put on vinyl, and both of those add a really pleasant noise floor. And yeah, I've heard multiple of my favorite producers say this kind of thing. Like once back in the day, I got to hear like a breaking down the beats thing live with Just Blaze, who has worked with Jay-Z and every other huge hip hop artist. And he said like there's this thing in that Jay-Z song PSA, allow me to reintroduce myself. My name is Hov. And in the intro, there's a part where he had been in Japan on tour with somebody and just took out his sound recorder and recorded what it sounded like to be in this super quiet park in Japan. And he put that layered under in a way that you can't really know that it's there. And he's like, yo, like, it's there. and nobody in the world knows it's there except you guys who I'm telling right now. But if you mute that track, it just sounds wrong. So I left it in. And another one of my favorite producers that's actually on a YouTube ad for Arcade by Output, and it's Rance from 1500 or Nothing, who also works with Jay-Z's, the drummer of Jay-Z's touring band, and a super producer as well. He says in that, like, he takes this vocal chop and he's like makes his line with it. And he's like, yeah, that's really cool. And then he like filters it and reverbs it out and turns it down so it's almost not in the beat anymore. He's like, yeah, there it is. Now it's just felt, not heard. That's how it's got to be. Sometimes you just have to have shit that's felt, not heard. And it's really echoing what I've been hearing from both of you guys right now. So it's making me smile. Like, yeah, my guys know what's up.
Yeah.
Love it.
Awesome.
I think it's worth noting too, this works really well if you have minimal beats. And I think that's why a lot of, let's say, amateur trap hip hop producers write subpar beats compared to, like, if you look at a lot of the old boom bap beats, they had a very specific energy and rawness to them. And a lot of that came from all of that floor noise that would get introduced from chopping up these samples. And if you have a very, very simple beat and you just want it to be like bare bones for the artist, I would suggest adding that sixth layer of rain or campfire or waterfall or whatever and tuck it back like minus 50 dB, minus 40. And that will make your song automatically sound much more intentional, much more full.
Yeah, man. I had a beat I made in New York, and I just like literally like stuck my phone out the window and recorded 3 minutes of what it sounded like on Ditmars Boulevard in Queens. The beat's called Ditmars, and it's tucked in there, just in the back. And every once in a while, you like, oh, that's a cool little effect you added there. Like, nope, that is a garbage truck squeaky brakes.
Nice.
Love it.
You're saying, Evan?
Yeah, I was just saying, shout out Windy Plains ambience, shout out Spanish Campfire ambience, shout out
New York
Playground ambience, shout out Rainy Day ambience through my window.
Dump trucks.
Go get yourself some ambiences, man. You depending on the vibe of the song, I will literally just be like, this feels like a rainy day. And then that low layer is a sample of someone recording rain through their window. You're not going to hear it anyways, but like it's those little details that like add to the emotion that you feel but not hear.
100%. I think too, it's worth noting that electronic music is relatively new. And so, you know, up until this point in time where electronic music was being created, correct me if I'm wrong, but I cannot think of a single genre that wasn't performed in some sort of live setting. And so immediately, as soon as you're actually playing in a physical space, you get this sense of depth. And that's what's lacking, I think, with a lot of people's electronic music compositions is it sounds very two-dimensional, and they don't get that full aspect of depth because they're not thinking about what environment is my song taking place in. And it kind of ties in with the folder structuring we talked about earlier. But I always tell people too, like when you're deciding your brand, think about what environment this takes place in. It's like, yeah, cool. It's DJ music, festival music, whatever, or it's radio music, whatever. But like, take it further. Does this happen in heaven? Does this happen in the midst of an acid trip? Does this happen? Like, where is the setting? What's the vibe you're trying to get across? And come up with a place. It could be a fantasy location. It could be a real location. But have a folder that helps you get that point across. And if you can get your stuff in a 3D space, it automatically sounds much more alive because now it sounds like it was performed and it exists in a living environment.
Amen.
Yeah. I think that's like also just a perfect thing to think about for your brand, right? Like what moment do you envision this song to be played in? You know, like for a club track, you're like a techno track, like you're envisioning like a dark club in Berlin and like just a strobe. You know, if you're big EDM guy, you're thinking of Coachella and like a bunch of rave kids going crazy. For myself, it's like music that I want to listen to while I'm doing shit outdoors. Like what song would narrate like me going snowmobiling? Like that, I feel like that is the inspiration for a lot of the stuff that I make. And having that, like, what does this song do? And like, why does this song exist? Helps guide some of those seemingly less important decisions on like texture and the background sounds and that kind of thing. So just coming up with that framework for yourself can definitely help guide some of those ambiguous decisions that you have to make.
As soon as you think of it in that way, like for you, for example, it's like you just stated, I want to make music that you'd listen to outdoors. It's like that automatically gets me thinking about all the possibilities. Like, let me make a riser that's a rev of my motorcycle, or let me layer up my drums with like twigs snapping and leaves, like dry leaves crackling and stuff like that. That is all so fundamental for you getting a unique sound. Sound, I feel like, can be boiled down to texture. Honestly, I know that's a very like broad generalization, but if you had to think of it in one way, obviously there's a lot more factors, the way you produce and certain tendencies and so on. But if you can just get like a textures folder and think of what sort of environment is my song taking place, and then uniquely incorporate those textures, bam, you're 90% of the way there.
Yeah, man. And just all this is really reminding me of that sweet mixtape Rip Kenny curated, Get Outdoors mixtape. And how cool that entire thing, like how it came together as a narrative of an actual story that like is a journey, and every part of it's like some kind of crazy outdoor moment, and it all flowed together, and there was so many like cool textures and vibes to that song, or for the whole mixtape, I mean, and for each song in it. Man, look, shouts out to that. And that video that Professor Lightwave did for it is so lit too. I'm gonna go back and watch that again. That thing.
Yeah.
I gotta link it.
Forgot about it. Okay, so when I came up with the concept for that, I was like, wait, music plus video plus actually written story? Like, this is dope. I'm going to do a bunch of these. And then I didn't do a single one after that because it was so much work to come up with and conceptualize start to finish an arc of a story with songs that fit that. And then I like the visual aspect wasn't even in my hands. And it was still like an inordinate amount of work to come up with something that I was happy with. But fuck, now reminiscing on it, man, I want to do that shit again.
Yeah, man. I think it'd probably be way easier for you to do over the course of like an EP that's all your music, as opposed to like a 20-song mixtape that's 20 different artists that then you're like, okay, out of all the music I just got handed, what is a story I can glean from this, as opposed to like, I have a story in mind and I have these songs and I can marry them.
Yeah, that's a fantastic. I'm so glad that you brought that up, because now that really makes me want to make an album that's like has a story, has video content from like shit outdoors. Like I have plenty of random footage that I could use as like bits of story, and have someone else that's better at editing video come and put the final touches on everything and have like a whole journey. That sounds cool.
I think it would be really epic too, and I'm sure you have a bunch of footage of outside. Just do like brief little interludes and like make the main focal point that of like just a random clip where you're just like exploring, and maybe your friends are talking in the background, or like I know on the Jack U project, I think there was a song or maybe even a few where they just had like random telephone conversations or just like random nights out, I guess, when they were shooting this shit and they happen to have an audio recording and they just tacked it on to the end of the song. Like stuff like that is just so raw and helps you connect on that human level. Yeah, personal.
Yeah, and I loved how the videos they did for that project also reflected that. It's like literally like it's cuts between, it's like, here's us on stage at a festival, here's us eating dinner, here's us snowboarding somewhere randomly in the world. Here's us like in this club. Here's us on a different stage at a different festival. And it's like, wow, it's like I really felt like I was along for the ride, sonically and visually. And I could see that working super well for a Rip Kinney project. Just all sorts of cool, like snowmobiling, hiking, whitewater rafting, whatever the fuck you like to do, man. It's all gonna look so sick when it's all like cut together with a whole narrative. I'm excited for that.
Ideas as bubbling,
Totally.
bubbling.
And that's why you should have good music friends. They can remind you of the cool shit you did so you can do it again.
Totally.
Yeah.
And on that note, we're signing off. Thank you guys for listening.
Thanks, friends, for being friends and being friendly with our friendship conversations today on the human. What is it again?
Woo! The Woo podcast.
Peace.
I like it.